Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are continuing on with the life of Elijah. Now, I did mention on Tuesday that we were going to be looking at Elijah and his successor Elisha today, but however, I completely forgot about 1 Kings chapter 19, which is incredibly beneficial and useful not just to the life of Elijah, but to us. And so I apologize about that. We'll get to Elijah and Elisha next Tuesday, and then we'll get to Elijah and his impact on the New Testament next Thursday. But today, I want to look at 1 Kings chapter 19. And the thing that I love about this chapter is to see how somebody as spiritual and as quote unquote with it spiritually as Elijah is as the prophet of God, how somebody like that can be so affected by fear and anxiety and depression, and how they can feel alone in this world. And the reason why I personally feel connected to that is because I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And so for me, it's cool to see these figures in scripture who we put so highly of have flaws that you and I, just going about our life trying to be more and more like Jesus, that we struggle with, they struggle with. And I think that's a really, really cool thing to see within Scripture. And then we can see, okay, so how do they cope with it? How do they deal with it? And we can learn from them. So let's do that today. So 1 Kings chapter 19, we're going to start in verse 1. So King Ahab told Queen Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So that's pointing back to the battle of Mount Carmel in chapter 18. Then Queen Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I don't make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." So death threat, basically. Then Elijah was afraid. Makes sense. And he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to the tribe of Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." So not only is Elijah scared, but he is scared to the point that he no longer wants to live, basically. And that is a very, very depressed place to be in, obviously. Verse 5. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank, and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, the mount of God. So this is a really interesting interaction between between Elijah and this angel. So this angel shows up and provides food and water for Elijah, just like the Lord provided food and water for Elijah in chapter 17, if we recall that passage from last week. So what's interesting here is just to see how that connects here. So the Lord providing it directly is through an angel. Now, obviously, it's still through the Lord, right? But it's through an angel. But it's interesting this time though. He does it twice, and the thing that I always think about is the phrase that the angel uses in verse 7. The journey is too great for you. You could take this in two ways. You could take this as a literal statement, which is referring to the 40 days and 40 nights journey that is mentioned in verse 8. Or you could take it metaphorically, that this journey of being what seems to be the only person that cares about the Lord and the only prophet that is willing to speak up for the Lord, that journey is too great. Or you could take both. The not only is the position that Elijah's in, being the only prophet, the quote unquote only prophet, as we'll see in a second, uh, the only one that speaks for the Lord. Uh, that's too great. But you could also take this 40 days and 40 nights journey to Mount Horeb. You could take both of those together. So, me personally, I think it's both. I think that the angel is referring to both the literal journey that he's about to go on, the 40 days and 40 nights, but I think he's also referring to the spiritual journey that Elijah is currently going on, as trying to stand firm as the representative for the Lord when nobody else will. And in our day and age, definitely, I can definitely understand that feeling of, oh my goodness, it just seems like I'm the only one at it, and it's just how are we going to do this, and how are we going to reach our neighbors, and how are we going to reach our community with the gospel? And it could, yeah, it could be tiring. Absolutely, it can. But then the Lord shows up to Elijah in a very powerful way. So, verse 9. There Elijah came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And so before we get into what comes after, which is really, really cool passage. Now, obviously, when the Lord asks, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" does he really not know? Of course he does. He knows exactly why Elijah is there. But he wants to hear it from Elijah personally. And the cool thing is, Elijah doesn't hold back. He tells the Lord, "Look, I have been completely on board with you." That term jealous, you could see that. Is it a jealousy when it comes to the sin? No, but it's reflecting a zealous spirit. That's kind of what you see there. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. That's all true. And but then we get to this statement here, "and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." Now, from the surface standpoint, you probably would say, yeah, again, that's true. Nobody seemed to be alongside of Elijah except for the Lord on Mount Carmel. And so on the surface, you would think, yeah, that's very a true statement. But you can also see the brutal emotion that Elijah uses here. I, even I only. Obviously, you have the repetition there with the word I, but you also have the even only. Those are huge words in this phrase because it shows the depth of Elijah's anxiety and the depth of his loneliness, or what he thinks. And so the Lord wants to show him that that's not actually the case, but he has to show them that. So he goes about showing him that in a way that's really astounding. Verse 11. And the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." or sorry, the mount, not the mouth. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" So before we get into the response from Elijah, to the same exact question as in verse 9 here in verse 13, at the end of verse 13, let's walk through how the Lord shows himself here in verses 11 and 12. In my mind, what's interesting is that he's making a connection, the Lord is, specifically, I believe, to the book of Exodus and the journey that the Israelites take as they are not only just leaving slavery behind in Egypt, but they are on this journey to become identified as the children of God as they travel from slavery in Egypt to freedom and in the promised land. And so, as they journey along, there are a few things that happens. First, the Lord directs them with a pillar of cloud, or what you could say is wind. But then that is during the day. But then during the night, he guides them with a pillar of fire. And then what's interesting is when they get to Mount Sinai, one of the things that happens at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 19 is that the mountain itself is described as shaking or an earthquake. So it's interesting to see that connection between 1 Kings 19 and Exodus. And so that to me is really interesting. And yet, through all those things that Elijah would know from the history of Israel, that the Lord was definitely using the wind and fire and the earthquake to show his presence, and yet none of those things do this time. The Lord uses them, but he doesn't use them to show his presence to Elijah. Instead, he uses a whisper. Instead, he uses a low voice. Some think that's a sound or a thin silence. My thinking is it is the Lord speaking audibly, but just in a very tender voice. So instead of using these grand theatrical ways to get a hold of Elijah, he uses something very personal, and that is how he gets a hold of him. And so he asks him again, "What are you doing here?" Again, the Lord knows what he's doing there. It's interesting to see the response. Verse 14. He said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." It is word for word the same response in verse 10 as here in verse 14. What does that tell us? Elijah isn't making this up. He is feeling this loneliness. He is feeling this anxiety and depression. He is feeling every ounce of that. Or else he would probably spin the story. But yet he sticks to exactly what he's feeling in his heart. He cries out to the Lord, what we would call lament. He cries out to the Lord. And so the Lord responds. Verse 15. And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria," which is a different country than Israel, which is really interesting. "And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Mahola, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So, what's really cool here is a couple things. So, first off, you have the Lord understanding the loneliness of Elijah. And so he tells him in verse 18 that there are actually 7,000 Israelites that are not only against Baal, but are on your side, Elijah. And so, therefore, don't feel alone. You don't have to feel alone. Even if those 7,000 people necessarily aren't in a prophet's vocation and as in the limelight as Elijah is, but just knowing that there are 7,000 people that that share the exact beliefs and values as Elijah has must have been such a just a relief for Elijah. So that's really, really cool to see that. The other thing that's really interesting is how the Lord sets up basically the lives of many in this one statement. So verses 15 and 16, you have Hazael to be the king of another country. Then you have Jehu to be basically the heir apparent to Ahab. So the time of Ahab will come to an end, and it definitely will. And so you have him in place, and then you have not only that, but you have somebody that will follow in Elijah's footsteps. Not only will he follow in Elijah's footsteps when it comes to the when Elijah is done with his mission as being the prophet of the Lord, but he will actually follow along step with Elijah literally for a time, and that gives Elijah the chance to not feel alone. And that is a really, really cool thing to see just how sovereign the Lord is. Basically, sovereign meaning that the Lord is in control. And not only is he in control of the things that brings us anxiety and brings us moments of depression, but he's in control of the things that bring us relief and encouragement as well. And he's in control of all of that. To the point uh, where he will even pinpoint the lines and rules and successors for his plan. So it's really, really cool to see that within the life of Elijah. So next week we will talk more about Elijah and his mentoring of his prophet heir and parent, and that is Elisha. And so we will get into that next week, and then wrap up the life of Elijah next week with how he connects with the New Testament, and specifically John the Baptist. However, I do want to just point out that in 2 Kings chapter 9, we do actually see Jehu not just anointed as king of Israel, but he even takes care of Queen Jezebel as well. He actually brings upon her execution. And so the Lord keeps his promises as well. So with that, I will see you next week. However, I'll see you with Broadman Word tomorrow as well. Thanks.